Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Tim is back again. Tim, I have you on. Like you should be just a weekly guest at this point. It's a pleasure to speak with you again, Tim. Do you mind reintroducing yourself to everybody out there listening, and then maybe a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. Real quick, I wrote a book called Hidden in Plain Sight, which dealt with the 52 witnesses that gave public testimony before the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the fall of 1978. And what I tried to do is not just analyze their testimony, but try to update the evidence up until I think at that point 2023 or so. Um, and as Robbie said, the discussion for today, at least some of the topics, and who knows where this will go, which is why I love coming on this show, because you never know where this is going to go. That makes it fun. But the issues that we kind of have tentatively scheduled, I guess, would be the acoustics evidence, the legitimacy of the acoustics evidence. Has it been updated? What is its relationship, if in fact it is true, to, let's say, the throat wound in JFK? That would be one point. Two or three other points would be the recent work, and I say recent, in the last 20 years, from people who have their doctorate degrees in metallurgy, not chemistry, the update of the evidence called neutron activation analysis, which is different lead comparisons in bullets and trying to secure that information to prove that this bullet came from this rifle or this gun or whatever. And the other two would be the illusion at frame 312 that Kennedy's head goes forward, which in fact it does not. And that eliminates a lot of stuff. And then finally, the growth of Kennedy's head wound from, let's say, 313 to, let's say, 335, which doubles, if not triples in size. So at some point, that has to be accounted for. An explanation has to be given. And then tying all this stuff together, at the end of the day, what does all this mean that we're talking about?
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Let's start off with the first one. Let's just talk about the acoustic evidence. Obviously, if you've been involved in the case for a little while, or just even briefly go into it, the acoustic evidence is very interesting. It's very scientific, but everyone rejects it, whether it's on the conspiracy side or if it's the lone nut side. It seems like they just don't trust the evidence or the science on that. Now, the same lone nutters that will reject the acoustics will also start shouting off the neutron activation analysis. Now, I will say I only have one clip on the neutron activation analysis. And if you listen to him talk about the science for neutron activation analysis in the FBI, this was the first test ever conducted on
Right.
neutron activation analysis, was that magic bullet and those fragments.
Yep.
So I have that clip. I'll play that later on. But
Okay.
everything is kind of back and forth. You can trust one thing or you can't trust the other thing, or you can trust the other thing and you can't trust the other thing.
Right.
It makes it very, very difficult. But what is your view on the acoustic evidence, and why is it controversial in the kind of community, even for people supporting that it does support a second shooter?
No question about it. I think the problem is that people don't really look into it. They dabble in it. They get confused by it. It's using language. All of a sudden, you're talking about automatic gain control and voice grade and all those things. In fact, I've heard people. One individual, Posner, when he was on your program, I remember him saying, if you listen to the tapes, you can't hear anything. Well, of course you can't hear anything any more than if I'm on my cell phone and somebody lights off a firecracker in the backyard and I'm in the house. You probably won't hear it because that's the point of voice grade. It amplifies your voice and muffles everything else. So, of course, you're not going to hear it, which is why they brought in acoustic experts to take a deep dive and analyze to see if there was any sounds on the open mic. Um, for me, this is just a no-brainer as far as the acoustics. I think James Barger, I mean, these people weren't just run-of-the-mill people. These are the people, the same individuals, the same company, Bolt, Baranek, and Newman, who took a look at the 18-minute gap in the Nixon tapes, came to the conclusion that it was done on purpose. They took a hard dive at the Kent State shooting, and pretty much put the guy within like a cubic foot of where he was actually standing. And when they confronted him, he said, "Yep, that's exactly where I was standing when I fired my rifle at the students at Kent State." So these guys were good. They were top of their game, and James Barger was probably the top guy in the world at the time. And he actually redid a lot of analysis when Tink Thompson did his book Last Second in Dallas and came to the same conclusions that yes, the acoustics evidence indicates 4 shots from the rear and 1 from the front. And when I asked Blakey about this, Like you said, yeah, there were five impulses or echo patterns or whatever you want to call them, but he didn't think he could sell it to either to the American public or to anybody, so he just stuck with four. But he knew there was five, and if you asked him today, he said, "Yeah, there were five." So his was just at that point being a salesman and realizing the difficulty involved if you say five instead of four. So, but that aside, I think the acoustics is legit. They set up microphones, and those microphones were absolutely in sync with what the shot analysis on the Zapruder film itself. And so that's either the biggest coincidence in the history of the world, or it's legit. And real quickly, what you'll hear people say to me, yeah, but the National Academy of Sciences, 1982, they disagreed or they refuted. I would just remind everybody that the National Academy of Sciences did look at it, headed by Norman Ramsey in 1982. But guess what? They did not have on their staff. They did not have one acoustics expert on their staff. So I don't take it that seriously. Barger was an acoustic expert, if not maybe the best in the world. So I'm going to take his judgment over people who have no real experience whatsoever in the acoustics at all. But the acoustics is important. It's not just four shots from the rear and one from the front. The one from the front is telling, because here's what never comes up, even by people who know about the acoustics. What is the one shot from the front that I think everyone would agree on, certainly within the conspiracy community? It's the shot at 313. But I'm going to repeat, four from the rear, one and only one from the front. And if that one from the front is at 313, that eliminates forever any discussion about a shot hitting Kennedy in his throat from the front. It can't happen. If the acoustics is true, that is a presupposition. And I'm banking on that it's true. And if it is true, the discussion on whether there's a shot that Kennedy in the throat is a waste of time, because that shot is already accounted for in 313 at the headshot. So we're going to have to come up with another reason for why Kennedy has whatever's wrong with his throat. And I say to people all the time when they say to me, "Well, hey Smith, you believe a conspiracy, but you seem to be at odds with your own camp." Not saying that the shot who hit Kennedy in the throat was from the front. You betcha. And here's my number one reason. Probably acoustics would be number two. Is that if there's a bullet that hit Kennedy in the front, where in the heck is it at? There's no bullet that they found in his body that I know of. It didn't go through his body, end up in the back of the limousine, because they went over that limousine with a fine-tooth comb. So if that's the case, then all the discussion we've ever had about the shot in Kennedy's throat in the front did not happen. And I know what, I can already hear what people are going to say. Well, yeah, but what about the doctors who were there? These guys were they were trained trauma surgeons. And they were. I'm not going to decry or mitigate anything they said. It's possible they could be wrong. It's possible that in the case of the throat wound, since it's not a bullet hitting Kennedy in the throat, all this talk about, well, the bullet wound, if it was an exit wound, would be bigger than. You can't have that discussion, because if the acoustics is right, then the shot is already accounted for, and you can't talk about, well, the shot, there was no shot that hit Kennedy in his throat. So we can quibble all day long about what is wrong with his throat, where did that come from. We need to be honest and go, maybe we just don't know what the answer is. Tink Thompson thinks it's some type of bone that erupted and protruded because of something that happened. I don't know what it is, but I'd rather say I don't know than try to have a second bullet come in from the front when the acoustic says, no, not happening, only one from the front. Now, you say, well, you're banking too much on the acoustics. Maybe I am. I would concede that point. But I happen to think the acoustics is accurate. I think it's just good, hard science. James Barger had no axe to grind, for goodness sakes. I don't think he cared one way or the other, whether it was a conspiracy or not. He was just trying to stick to the science. And Weiss and Ashkenazi, they came in after James Barger and confirmed what he said, and even to a higher degree, if you remember. So there you have three acoustic experts. Now let's compare that with the Normsey panel, who had no acoustic experts. So I don't have much interest in what they say. So, but when they went to Daley Plaza in the summer of '78 and they fired, what was interesting is that the gap between shots, the sequence of the shots, line up perfectly with the Zapruder film. Now, again, that's either the biggest coincidence of all time, or maybe the acoustics evidence is right. Now, I know you read Don Thomas's book, which he has an enormous amount of material in his book on the acoustic because that was kind of his baby. It may not be the easiest stuff to read, but it is readable, and I think he's a good writer. And he made this up pretty plain. King Thompson did the same thing in his book Last Second Dallas. It's not impossible to understand this stuff, but it's not as easy to understand. Let's say interviewing a witness. That's a lot easier to play with and understand. The acoustics is science, and science can be difficult sometimes. But I don't think that means we shouldn't even try just because it's a little difficult, for goodness sake. But my main point is, if the acoustics is true, and I will qualify it with an if it's true, then the discussion about whether the wound or whatever it is in Kennedy's throat is entrance or exit, it certainly is not it's not an entrance wound, that we know. Is it an exit wound? I would argue that it probably is. I don't believe in the single bullet theory. I think if it is an exit wound out of his throat, that bullet went over the windshield halfway down the city of Dallas, never to be recovered. So I can still hold the back wound, front wound, without tying myself up with the single bullet theory. I don't believe in the single bullet theory, and I don't think I have to make this work. And that's the problem. Is sometimes it's what's really strange, Robbie, is this whole case seems to have settled down into the field of science. The acoustics is science, neutron activation analysis is science, photographic science, trying to figure out why these wounds expand from 313 to 335, looking at the photographic evidence of 312 to assume, and I think David Wimp proved, that Kennedy's head does not go forward at 312. In fact, it's due to simply Zapruder jerking his camera and causing what is called a photographic swipe on the film. That's all that's going on. Now, if all that is true, again, I will qualify it with an if. Those 4 points is all science from start to finish. So that's kind of interesting that the whole thing has kind of evolved into a debate within the field of science.
You said Zapruder swiping his film to the left?
Yeah, what went on for years, and I used to say it myself when I would give talks. I would say, look, Kennedy's head goes forward at 312 and then snaps back at 313. And I can remember driving home, Robbie, thinking to myself, I'm not comfortable with that. What are the odds that a shot's going to hit Kennedy at 312 and then an 18th of a second later, I can't snap my finger that quick. He's shot in the head, and so he has this double hit at 312 and 313. What David Wimp discovered, David Wimp had, again, the joy of this is David Wimp has no interest at all in the Kennedy assassination. He was just looking at the film. He was a systems engineer out in, where was he at? It was out west someplace. And he discovered that what really went on is when you look at 312 and 313, 313 is preternaturally clear. It's pristine. 312 is blurry. And what you notice is that Conley's head looks elongated. And the reason for that is Zapruder most likely jerked the film and it extended the images in the film. And then he settled down by the time 313 comes back. If that's true, I've done the measurements. I've looked at still photographs, and it seems, yeah, wow. The frame in 312 seems to be rather elongated, and if that's true, then our measuring points simply are false. Is that what's that
313?
I got to mix up. I would say 313. 313. Now compare that to 312. I don't know if you can. Yeah, 312 is very, very clear, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure Zapruder was swiping, but let's not forget Marilyn Zitzman was behind Zapruder holding him still.
You're absolutely right. So why is 312 so clear and 313 is so, if you throw 313 up there, Robbie, you can see, I mean, this looks really, really clear. Now compare that to 313, and Conley's head seems to be elongated. Everything is elongated. So if that's what you're measuring by, then your points of reference are just simply false, because that's not what's going on at all. What's going on at all is the camera probably jerked, probably because, Zapruder heard the muzzle. I mean, just look at Conley's forehead there.
Yeah, he's a little blurry.
Yeah, and look at the top of the limo, that bar that gets elongated. Conley's forehead is elongated. So if that's what you're doing to measure, then yeah, it's going to look and appear as if Kennedy's head goes forward at 312 and then back at 313. When in fact that's not the case at all. The only reason it looks that way is because the images here in 313, as you can see, everything is blurry. So that's not exactly the best route to go if you want to measure things. So, but this for years, Robbie, as you know, this was just, the case. Wow, he shot at 312. And what you have in 313 is not a front shot, but what you have in 313 is the end of 312. When in fact, 312, he's not going forward at all. The only thing going forward in the limousine is just the natural jostling of being in the limousine. Now, if that's what you want to prove, then we're talking like, what, quarter of an inch, half an inch, whatever it is. But some people will argue, oh, no, he goes forward like 2.5 inches or something. No, he doesn't. He doesn't go forward at all. And the reason he doesn't go forward at 312, Robbie, is because there's not a shot at 312. There's only a shot at 313, and that drives Kennedy back. And I think when David Wimp discovered this, and what that eliminates is all the discussion about neuromuscular reaction, the jet effect. That discussion doesn't mean anything because that discussion is based on that you can measure something at 312 that simply is not there. And I want to repeat, this used to bother me when I would give talks, and I'd be up there saying, yeah, 312, he goes forward, then he's jerked back, so there's a double hit within an eighth. And I used to think to myself, driving home later on the night, that doesn't sound right. There's just something about that just does not work.
What do you attribute this to then?
What do I attribute what to what, Robbie?
What do you attribute this to? The upward motion of Kennedy's hands.
That's a good question.
I mean, you could fight the argument that it looks like Connolly right there has been hit at the same time.
Yeah, but I think what we have to remind is, as long as it takes me to snap my finger, that shot is over. I mean, that bullet's traveling about 2,200 feet per second. So us talking about it, it's happened like a dozen times in the course of one sentence. That's how quick this thing is over. What I think happened was Kennedy was shot in the back. I think the bullet leaves his throat, and I think that's why his hands go up. I think Connolly is shot very soon after that. And when I say very soon, probably about 1.5 seconds, which guess what, Robbie? That's exactly what the acoustic said. 1.6 seconds.
If you look at this, Kennedy has his hands up and Connolly has not reacted to being hit yet. The argument by Michael Bodden stated that a lot of people experience pain at different rates. That was his argument to the HSCA, which is true. But there's a large difference between being hit by a bullet and having a full couple seconds later where you have a reaction to that. That we're talking about, like, that's a large kind of, I guess, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the right word here. I can't think of the word. It's a large kind of, dude, I'm brain farting on this. I'm gonna have to edit this part out.
Gap?
Yeah, it's a huge gap compared to putting your hand on a stove and then like a second later you move your hand. This is a bullet hitting you and then having at least 1 or 2 seconds later. It's the car is, we're looking at it now, is at a more of an angle, but it's kind of lined up with Zapruder when Connolly actually turns around and then winces again. I think, again, that could be shot from behind, sure, but everyone brings this up, the grabbing of the front of the throat, as being a shot from the front.
Right, yep.
But if you're saying that the headshot would have to be the shot from the front, if the acoustics, but did the acoustics people have enough time to do a very thorough job with their thing, or did they find this piece of evidence and bother not testing anymore? They had problems with their microphone setups.
They did, and to be fair, that's a good question. The one thing that Don Thomas used to always bring up is that the only one of the 5 shots that they did what he called like this super deep dive into the sonometer, I think is what it's called, was the shot by the grassy knoll. They looked at the other 4 very seriously. But it was only the shot behind the grassy knoll that they took, I guess, an ultra deep dive in. But if Kennedy is shot somewhere around 210, the HSCA says 189, 190, all that. And certainly Connolly by frame 237, 238 is showing some reaction. But keep in mind, Connolly himself said on every single time he testified that he turned to his right to see if he could see the president. And he couldn't, which means Kennedy is inward enough that he couldn't see him when he turned around to his right. So he's in the process of turning back. That's when he felt.
That would agree with your point where Kennedy didn't have this like jerk back. He kind of just started slumping down to the left. And as we saw in frame 313, he's sitting there holding his throat a little bit bent over, which is right out of Connolly's viewpoint. If he's trying to turn to his right, he's got the seatbelt and everything right there. It's going to be very difficult for him to try to turn all the way around.
Very.
And then JFK, Jackie and JFK are right there. But the thing is, when you look at this is the noise pattern or what they used. These things that go above the noise thresholds are the number of shots that they were saying.
Five.
Five. So you said five. They didn't count some of these because there's more than five here. The ones that go a little bit above the noise threshold, and I remember hearing Blakey talk about this in an interview, is that they just considered those as like could possibly be echoes or some kind of car backfiring or something of that sort.
Absolutely.
So they stuck with four and then the one shot to get the five. Is it possible they could have accidentally mistaken one of those things that they did not include as it can being another shot from the front? The reason I bring that up is the windshield is a lot of people have stated that there was a hole in the windshield. Whether that was a hole from the inside, it is safety glass. I've heard that they said that it was a thing from the inside, so that could have been the bullet or anything bouncing and then coming out of Kennedy and hitting right into the windshield. We know that there was a dent in the rear view above it where a bullet fragment had been hit and lodged in there.
True.
But I guess the whole kind of point to this is the headshot doesn't need to go into the windshield at all. It can literally go above the car.
Absolutely.
It was at a perfect angle. You would have enough height from the grassy knoll.
Yep.
But one of these being taken out that passed the noise threshold because of the fact that they just did not have the time or did not have the proper maybe audio evidence to be able to conclusively prove that that might have been another shot. Again, silencers people bring up all the time. I know
Yep.
it becomes a bit of an argument, but again, that windshield is very damning as evidence just because if you look at, let's see what we got on.
Well, when I look at the windshield, Robbie, I've never seen a through and through hole in the windshield. Never.
I think from what I've heard, and it's two people, I know one person gets mentioned, but I'll play their testimony in a second once I'm done showing the thing. I just wanted to kind of show some of these photos because we have a bullet right here
Yep.
in that rear view. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Now, all fragments and other things that were collected out of the limousine, some things were not submitted. We have a picture. I believe it is right here. It's this famous one right here. We have DPD officers and other people with a bucket and a scrub brush. Again, there were bullet fragments put into that bucket. That is on at least 4 different testimonies, and that is in documents, okay? And it was not submitted into evidence. We have no idea where those fragments went, okay? They just vanished. So again, if you're trying to think about a giant grand cover-up or just a bunch of people doing different orders, I would like to think it's a bunch of people doing different orders.
I agree.
Nobody's really paying attention to what's going on.
Absolutely.
Because I think even some people said, no, don't wash the bucket out or don't wash the limousine out. And some people stated that, and then some people said that they went there with a bucket and they started scrubbing the back seat. And then you got Paul Landis coming out later saying he found the magic bullet lodged in the back of the seat or something like that. So again, you get into all this, you have to start wondering when it comes to the windshield. If we come back here, we have one right there in the rear view. We have, let's see, this one right here. That's safety glass. That does not look like a straight through and through to me.
Me either.
But by the time it got to Parkland Hospital, Dr. Evana Angelis, whatever her name is, she stated that she could stick a pencil through it. And then it's also another witness as well, too. I'll play their testimonies in just a second. But again, when we get to this point, when you're looking at this is a little bit more convincing. But this is also after the car had been driven to Ford Motor Company, after it could have hit a bump on the road, a crack splits a little bit more, the carefulling and all that. I mean, it was transferred on a C-130 plane. It could have split a little bit more into that. So you can't really use that as any evidence. But again, this is all just stuff that was kind of neglected when it came to the whole discussion of a front shot. A lot of this stuff was bullet fragments, things were taken out, and the windshield was packed up and the car was put right back on the road for service to get used like the next day.
The one thing the acoustic said is that somewhere in the vicinity of 12 feet from the corner west of the stock, where the fence at the grassy knoll meets at a corner, and you go west about 10 to 12 feet, that's where the shot was, behind the grassy knoll. They were pretty adamant about that. And that they felt that the acoustics only indicated one shot from the grassy knoll, and then at 3:27, 7/10 of a second later, there's another shot that hits Kennedy. So unless you're having an automatic rifle back there, you don't have to recock, reload, or whatever you do. That had to have come from another direction, not the same person. Could not have gotten a shot off that quick. 7/10 of a second is awfully darn quick. And the acoustics concluded that shot 5 was from the rear, about frame 327. And the HSCA talks about this near the very end, that there was some evidence for this, but they never got to it because they went too much into the mafia stuff, and then they ran out of money. But Bodden was ready to go all in on the 327 shot. It would have been interesting to see what he would have said about it. But
I want to play this one real quick.
I
sure.
realized that there was a bullet hole in the windshield. Talked to my friend next to me and said, "Look, there's a bullet hole in the windshield," and pointed it out to them. At the time, I did not know any of the details of the shooting. I was quite shocked when I looked up and saw the bullet hole, but it was very clear. It was a through and through bullet hole through the windshield of the car from the front to the back. I don't believe there's even any cracks associated with that bullet hole. It seemed like a high velocity bullet that had penetrated from front to back in that glass pane. At which point a security officer of some type raced forward and jumped in the limousine and drove it off, even as I was leaning against it, to an area back of us somewhere. And that was the last time I saw the limousine.
Again, that can be very conspiratorial, like they're trying to hide evidence, but their main mission was to make sure no one got photos from inside the car, and it was going to be published. Which I agree with that point. I don't. But the issue is, again, people are denying not using a bucket and cleaning up things. And I think a lot of people
again, is it possible that she's mistaken? Well, of course, it's possible she's mistaken. Who knows? And in the moment, if we'd have been standing there, maybe we would have glanced over there. We possibly would have thought the same thing. I don't know. The only thing I'm saying, Robbie, is if the acoustics evidence is true, there's only one shot that came from the front, and that's the 313.
I don't doubt the acoustic evidence. I think it's controversial, so I usually don't talk about it as like my main talking point. I like to think that it's accurate, but at the same time, I do think that if they probably would have had more time and it wouldn't have been as rushed, if they would have probably done it twice over, they might have come up with also more results or something else. Again, I think they got the results that they got, and then they hurried up and submitted it. That's it came at the tail end of the HSCA, and it was interesting because I'll play this too. Richardson Pryor talking to Jeremiah O'Leary. I think I've talked to you about Jeremiah O'Leary being like a plant for Hoover's FBI. He's sitting there saying, like, what does this mean? You don't have to agree, Mr. Pryor, that it means conspiracy or that there's two shooters. And Pryor's like, if the evidence is suggesting this, then common sense logic would just say that there was more than one. So
exactly.
Again, he would have been open to it and having that discussion, wherever it leads to. But again, I think it was just submitted. I don't think it was fully finished, the acoustics. I think it was good enough to open up the door for conspiracy. But again, that's why I think it makes it very difficult to talk about, because you want to use it because it's scientific.
Here's what I would suggest to your audience, Robbie, is that pick up Tink Thompson's book, Last Second in Dallas, where he went to visit Barger out east, and they redone all the tests and went over all the mathematics, and he published everything in his book, and it is as sound now as it was in 1978. So I think that Thompson doing that with Barger needs to be taken very seriously. And as a result, I think it solidifies the acoustics evidence for me anyway, once and for all.
It should have been extended in the HSCA for
I agree.
More talk about the acoustic evidence. I want to play this one. It's JFK, Richard Dudman. It's a clip I have. It's my buddy Casper doing the voiceover for it because it's just a document that we're reading.
Dudman, a reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, was in a press bus on November 22, 1963, and witnessed the assassination of JFK. Dudman wrote in an article entitled Commentary of an Eyewitness. A few of us noticed the hole in the windshield when the limousine was standing at the emergency entrance after the president had been carried inside. I could not approach close enough to see which side was the cup-shaped spot that indicates a bullet had pierced the glass from the opposite side. Dudman told interviewers that a Secret Service agent shoved him and the other reporters away when he tried to examine the hole to determine the direction from which it had been fired. Dudman also wrote about the doctors at Parkland claiming an entrance wound in the throat, just below the Adam's apple, where about a necktie knot would be. Mr. Dudman declined to discuss the assassination with anyone for many years, while his earlier commentary bears mute witness to his present silence.
Now, do we know what striations or markings on the tie showed that if it was going from an outward or inward angle when they removed his JFK's tie?
I will say this. In fact, I put this in my book that if I can find it, really wish I would have had an index for my book. It would have been easier even for me to find things. It's in Stuart Gallinore's book. He shows how the wound gets larger as you go from front to back. And that's true. It does. And that is a minor problem. However, who knows why? Bullets do crazy things, Robbie. We know that. To me, the most logical explanation, if the acoustics is right, is that the throat wound is an exit wound. And when people say, well, exit wounds are always bigger than entrance wounds, well, it depends. It depends what it hits. And that's not always true. I've talked to doctors who say sometimes that's just simply not true. Most of the time, yes, but not always. That being the case, if it doesn't hit a whole lot going in and out JFK's throat, then it has nothing to push out to make the wound bigger. That's why wounds are usually bigger, because they take everything with it that they strike when they go through the body. But if it went through JFK's body and minimally hit much of anything, then it could have gone through his throat and exited and not have a big hole at all. So that doesn't bother me. The point that I would emphasize, again, it's a big if, and I don't mean to be incredibly repetitive, but if the acoustics is true, then the game's over as far as the throat wound. And I'm not saying we can't discuss it. Of course, we can discuss it because we're doing it right now. But if the acoustics is true, the front shot is taken care of at 313, and we're going to have to come up with another explanation as to Kennedy's throat wound. For me, it's an exit wound. It always has been. Because remember, Kennedy's back wound, and I talked to Dr. Bodden and Dr. Weck at this almost the same day, or maybe one day apart, back in 2003 out in Pittsburgh. And they both looked at me and I said, is it true that when the forensic pathology panel looked at Kennedy's back wound, that everybody agreed? And remember, Weck was the only one who believed a conspiracy on that panel. Everybody else believed lone nut. But they all agreed on this, Robbie, is that the back wound in JFK was rising at 11 degrees. Rising at 11 degrees. And that the throat wound, when it left his throat, also rising at 11 degrees. If that's true, then there's your answer right there. The only problem with that theory is people ask me, well, if that's true, Smith, then where's the shooter at? I don't know. I have no idea. I wasn't there. I don't know where the shooter was. The only thing I'm telling you is that when the panel looked at it in 78, every single member of the pathology panel said it was rising at 11 degrees. Well, if it's rising at 11 degrees, that would explain why it left his throat at 11 degrees and probably went over the windshield and never to be seen again. That would be my guess. It's not just an easy explanation. It may be the right explanation. You know, I mean, maybe Occam's razor is rearing its head once again. That we need to stop making these things more complicated than they actually are. Maybe it's just that simple: back wound, throat wound, game over. Okay, next. But we tend to, and I'm not exactly sure why we tend to even push against this, but we do. And I don't know if it's the science again. I don't know what the reason is. But it takes a little bit of the mystery out of it if it's true. That's for sure.
I'm going to play this clip right here. It's Missing Forensic Materials. It's LBJ and Abe Fortas on 10/3/66.
Okay.
It was never talked about. The clothes were put in the vault just because this is Kennedy's deal.
I would doubt that. I'll bet $10 they're in the archives of the Kennedys. I saw a story last night somewhere where Bobby had no, it's this morning in the U.S. News. It's out today. He had seized all the pictures, missing X-ray pictures that provide the major remaining mystery about the facts of the assassination of President Kennedy are reported, some officials concerned, have been taken over soon after the assassination by Robert Kennedy, then turned and placed in the Kennedy archive. They reportedly were never offered the Warren Commission investigating the assassination, because this would have involved publication in the report of the gory death pictures.
Oh, good point. Well, the chief thinks there. I'll find out about that.
So again, I'm looking at that. There's evidence being withheld, but really it was looking at the clothes to be able to see where, like, the tie or anything that would show any types of markings, if it was going to be an inward or an outward type thing going on when it came to the bullets. Again, when we get to Bethesda Hospital, they open up that. Was it Parkland or no? It was at Bethesda. Bethesda is where they opened up the neck wound, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they opened up the neck wound at Parkland because they did the tracheotomy, so it was already like that when they got to Bethesda.
So they never asked if it was a tracheotomy, or they never asked what they did exactly. The people at Parkland were just trying to save Kennedy's life, and they saw a hole there. They figured that was the best way to go enter already because there's already a pre-existing hole. And they never communicated with Bethesda Hospital, or Bethesda Hospital never bothered to ask any of the Parkland doctors what procedures were done. They kind of just started going into it and then marking down what they could find.
Yeah, which is odd. That you would think that you would call the doctors who saw him first to get any updates of something that they need to know before they perform the autopsy. That is odd.
I want to play this one of our friend Michael Baden.
Oh, okay.
As I understand it, in your testimony, you acknowledge that you had viewed the Zapruder film at least on one occasion, if not more.
Yes. The panel had many occasions to view the Zapruder film in slow motion and frames, and were very concerned about seeing the film and trying to make understanding.
Now, when I ask you this, I recognize you're not a ballistics expert and you're not testifying as a matter of as to the ballistic evidence. But as a matter of medical evidence, in light of the fact that you have viewed the Zapruder film, can you state it as a medical certainty that there were no shots fired from the grassy knoll which could have struck either Governor Connally or President Kennedy?
If I can take into account the autopsy findings and the Zapruder film, the autopsy findings, all the implications of the Zapruder film.
That's what I'm asking.
I can state for the majority of the panel, and Dr. Weck will have his own opinions that he'll explain to you, that there's no evidence to a reasonable degree of medical certainty for any bullet to have struck the president from the front or the side, that the only bullets that struck the president are two from behind.
What do you got?
Okay.
What do you got to say about that?
You know, when I read and reread the volume, especially for my book, I kept getting this weird feeling, and I know it's just a feeling, but that the fix was in. You'd start to read, and then you go, okay, I see where this is going. And then, okay, I see where this is going. It's like it was a fait accompli. It was already done before they testified. And they were not going to buck the single bullet theory, and they didn't. I mean, the HSCA agreed 100% with the Warren Commission on the single bullet theory. And it's just like, bullets do crazy things, Robbie. There's no question about that. But to act as if this bullet can go through what it went through, not just Kennedy, but Connally's 6'4" body, shatter 10 centimeters of his right, one of his ribs on the right side, obliterate it, and then supposedly go into his wrist and then into his thigh and fragment even more. And yet when you see the bullet, it doesn't look fragmented at all. It looks like a whole bullet. So even though bullets will do crazy things, I talk to people all the time, Robbie, who their whole life, for whatever reason, is bullets, rifles, and guns. I mean, they know this stuff, and it's not a criticism. It's just that's what their hobby is. But one thing they all agree on is they've never in their life seen a bullet that struck any kind of a hard surface that didn't deform, except this bullet. This bullet doesn't really deform. Oh, sure, you can see there's an extrusion at the end of the bullet, but that can be explained simply by the firing mechanism. You don't need to strike anything to do that. But that this bullet can strike a 6'4" Texan and wipe out his right fifth rib and then almost sever his radius bone and come out not deformed, I think is just laughable. It's like, why are we still even talking about this nonsense? That's just absurd. There's never been a bullet in the history of the world that did it except this one. Bullets don't behave that way. They hit things and they deform. And to me, the proof of this is the Warren Commission. They disproved their own theory. They published this slide which shows the single bullet, CE-399, in all of its glorious grandeur. And next to that, they show a bullet that was shot into cotton wadding, and then they show a bullet that went through, I think it was the carcass of a human being, severing the radius bone. And then I think one was the carcass of a goat or something like that. And every single bullet, Robbie, is worse than CE-399. Like, what are the odds of that? You know?
No, it's this
there.
one.
It is right there.
This one right here.
That's it. Look at CE-399 to the far left. and then the other ones go through basically cotton wadding, and then the one to the right of that, as I'm looking at it, went through, I think I think that one went through the goat, and then the last one went through a human cadaver and struck the radius bone. And they're all, including that one that you have the cursor on right now, even that one going into cotton wadding is worse than 399.
Yeah.
So even the Warren Commission refutes their own theory. They want us to believe that CE 399 had almost no deformation, almost no loss of anything. And even when you look at some photographs of CE 399, there's a little glitch out of the top of the bullet. That's not because it struck anything. That was done on purpose to do spectrographic analysis. So you can't even count that. So this thing is looking pretty sweet. We're going through 7 layers of skin and smashing 2 large bones in a 6'4" Texan. You know, we minimize going through skin, but skin's pretty durable, Robbie. I mean, it's what keeps our insides inside. And so it goes through 7 layers of skin, breaks Connolly's right 5th rib, and almost severs his radius bone and comes out and looks like that. Not a chance. Not a chance. And nobody that I've ever talked to, when I showed them that, and I've given hundreds of talks over the years, and when there's hunters, experienced hunters in the audience, and I show them this, they start laughing out loud. They can't even contain themselves. They go, that's just absolutely nonsense. They don't even take it seriously. The only people that take it seriously are the people who have an axe to grind, and they want to promote the single bullet theory and the lone gunman and all that. And at that point, you're not even being honest. Like, you know, have some integrity. Be honest. You know, I mean, I'll give Posner credit. He said, look, if the acoustics is true, there's a conspiracy. Game over. He doesn't believe it. That's fine. But he at least sees the logical connection between the two. And I've heard Posner try to explain this slide, and his explanation is, well, the reason CE 399 doesn't deform is because it slows down as it's going through the body. Well, it didn't slow down that much. You know, I mean, you know, it didn't come to where it was only going through the body at 3 miles per hour when it started out at 2,200 feet per second. So that, you know, that's just nonsense. You're just trying to. If these people were in my logic class that I teach every semester, they would flunk, because there's no possible way in a logic class you could ever prove this or even come close to proving it. People would just start laughing, like, what? And that's the problem I have. And one of the problems, Robbie, is books. Once you publish a book, no one's going to go back and say, oh, yep, I didn't look at it close enough, and guess what? I was wrong. When was the last time you had anybody ever say that to you? Not once. And they're not going to. But I'll tell you this, not because I'm anything great, but if someone shows me something in my book and it's wrong, I'll say, yep, I was wrong. Because I don't have that big of a horse in the race. I don't have any territory that I'm trying to guard. Do I think there was a conspiracy? Yes. And I have reasons why I think that. But if I sat down with Gerald Posner for the day, or anybody who believes what he believes, and they could prove to me, and I mean really prove to me, I would renounce my own book, for goodness sakes. It's just, but that's the problem. Human pride will stop most of this from happening, and that's unfortunate.
Well, CE 399 doesn't have a chain of custody or a proper one.
You're absolutely right, Robbie. No chain of custody at all.
Neither does the rifle. But another thing is, I like to trust the testimony of John Connolly, who was the only person that identified there were rifle shots when he first heard them.
Thank you.
But he also kind of messes with the echoes, because Connolly said there were no echoes. I have that clip I can play, but also I wanted to play this one, which was the HSCA when they were introducing the acoustics.
You know, that's interesting you would say that. I want to say 2 things. That Connolly would not have, the bullet would have hit him before he would have heard the bullet fired, given the speed of sound. That's point 1. So,
well, that's why he said that the bullet that hit JFK didn't hit him, because he was already turning around when he heard the shot. He wasn't hit
exactly. Yet. Yeah, and you know, I don't hold that against Connolly. He's not a physics professor, so okay, he gets a pass on that one. But you know, the echo thing. What we need to remember is, yeah, there were buildings down there. There was the Tech School Book Depository, the County Records Building, the Daltech Building. But on all the other sides, there was nothing. I mean, if you go far enough, you're going to run into something, of course. But that was a pretty open space down there, to be honest with you. When you go, if you're standing on Elm Street and you go pretty much north or south, you have to walk a little ways before you hit a building. And by going west, yeah, you're going to run into the underpass. But this thing isn't just flocked with 8,000 buildings down there, though there are some open spaces. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a clip talking about the echoes.
such as an echo generated in Dealey Plaza, you have reflecting surfaces also, the walls and corners of the buildings there. They too will generate echoes, but they will tend to come in very much more closely in sequence, so that even if you have a very short, sharp sound, such as a rifle firing, okay, or again a clap of the hands, you'll get back what to an observer, or many observers, will sound like a single loud bang type thing. But if you were to record that and say play it back at 1/4 or 1/8 the speed at which you recorded it, you would actually be able to hear the independent echoes coming back. In fact, what you would hear would be something like bang, 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 and diminishing in amplitude as you got to hearing echoes that came over longer and longer paths. To the human ear, you don't hear that because the first loud echo sort of partially deafens the ear, and it decreases your sensitivity to the later arriving sounds. What you hear, therefore, is a single loud sound with a diminishing intensity.
That's a good clip, Robbie.
Thank you. I wanted to play this one next with, this is Connolly being asked by Floyd Fithian.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. When you heard any of the 2 shots that you heard, Governor, or any of the 3 that you heard, Mrs. Connolly, is there any echo? Did you hear any echo from the building, or was there any sort of a sound effect along with it? Just heard the shot.
Congressman, I wasn't conscious of any echoes. I'm sure there probably were some, but I certainly was not aware of them.
What you heard was just a very clear, distinct shot. Yes, period. Sir. That's your recollection.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, they fired shots from the textbook depository with the rifle inside the window and with the rifle outside the window. What was I going to say? The echo thing is interesting because they're right, but most of the echoes you probably wouldn't be able to pick up with the naked ear. But yeah, all kinds of things are going to produce echoes. But will those echoes? They're not going to drown out. In other words, it'd be pretty obvious if someone's clapping their hand, it's not going to spike on the oscillograph like a gunshot, for goodness sakes. It's not even close. So, and that's what they were looking for. They were looking for these echo patterns to emerge, and they found 5 fairly distinct echo patterns when they did all the testing.
This is a shot from the Knolls with the acoustics. Eventually, what they concluded here.
Right.
You asked to do on this occasion?
Oh, the objective there was to perform a refined analysis of the data relating to the presumed shot occurring, the third possible shot that was examined by Dr. Barger, the one that was thought to have been the result of a gun firing at the grassy knoll.
And you began that work in early October?
That is correct.
And you just very recently concluded the work, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Based upon the work, were you able to reach a conclusion with any greater degree of certainty as to whether or not that shot did or did not occur?
Yes, sir, we did.
And what was your conclusion?
As the result of very careful analysis, it appears that with a probability of 95% or better, there was indeed a shot fired from the grassy knoll.
That is a huge clip. That is huge. I mean, that what he just said, Robbie, sent shockwaves across this planet when he said that, because no one was expecting him to say that I'm aware of. I mean, that's just huge. I mean, 95% from some of the best acoustics people in the world. Even if you don't agree with it, fine, but you have to take this guy seriously. He knows his stuff, and so you're gonna have to come up with a reason why we disagree with him.
Just because you're saying that, I might as well pull this up. Again, anybody that's listening or watching this, you can just see. You can go to my channel right here. You can hit shorts or the little microphone, or not microphone.
How many shorts do you have now, Robbie?
I have no clue.
There's hundreds of those things. I love those things.
I try and make a bunch. I actually found an interesting 2 ones about Nixon. I emailed the archives for Nixon's library because they don't have a lot of their tapes online. You have to email and special request for them. And I looked up Rowley's name and was trying to find stuff with James Rowley, and I found like 5 conversations he's involved in. They're 3 hours long a piece.
Oh, wow.
And They're terrible audio quality.
Oh, God.
I'll play one of the Nixon tapes and you can listen to it and you're like, I don't understand what he's even saying right now. It's very difficult, but you can make out some of the words. But I'm trying to find, there's a Pryorson. If you look up Pryor, you can see where he's being interviewed in the after talk after the evidence has just been included. And I wanted to kind of show you this right here. It says, could be scientific evidence of a conspiracy.
Right.
It could be a conspiracy of two nuts, to put it bluntly, rather than a conspiracy of a political nature, which we usually tend to think of when we say conspiracy. That is, we think whether there are Russians behind it or organized crime or something of that sort. It doesn't look like it's any sort of a political conspiracy of that sort. It's going to be an interesting question of law if all you have is this evidence, scientific evidence, saying there was a second shooter and nothing else to corroborate it. Is that enough evidence to prove a conspiracy or to go to the jury on the question? And as a matter of law, it's interesting that the state court law in most states would say, no, that's not enough evidence.
So I have that one, and then I think I have another one that goes along the same line.
Well, they would do everything they can to put Oswald in that window, let me tell you.
I think it's yeah. This is Jerry O'Leary telling Mr. Pryor he does not have to accept the findings of the acoustic evidence.
I don't suppose the findings of the acoustics experts, so long as you refer to it in your final report, but don't you also have the prerogative of sending the entire committee report to the Justice Department for follow-up and prosecution of anyone who may be found culpable?
Yes, right. And I would think that all of the matters that we haven't been able to resolve, and unfortunately this did come in at the last minute, we will refer it to probably a particular aspect of the Justice Department to follow up on.
Does it trouble you at all that some of the evidence that these scientists produced today is based on what one member called test tube analysis in New York, which is quite a distance removed from Dallas?
I love it how he adds that at the ending, that it's like test tube, big fancy science from New York, so why should we trust it?
That is, geez, oh, Pete, that's ridiculous. Are you kidding me? What does it matter where you do it at? If they do it in Switzerland or in Reykjavik, Iceland, what's it matter?
This was potentially 4 shots, 2 shooters, and it's still the same commentary.
Okay.
Itself, is there skepticism about this new evidence?
Yes, indeed there is, and I myself am skeptical of it, and that's why I'm here today, to see if something convincing is brought forth. There's a quantum leap from deducing or proving 4 shots, one of which, shot number 3, came from the grassy knoll, if that indeed occurred, to adduce that this indicates a conspiracy because if going from A to C, it skips point B. And that is the possibility that some federal officials have raised, that if there were 4 shots and they came from 2 different directions, there is no proof of any kind that I'm aware of that that the 2 putative gunmen knew one another or in fact conspired.
I love it how they're doing the whole 2 random nuts that don't know each other rather than just 2 people that know each other.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if I were to talk to him, again, I bring him into my logic class, Robbie, and ask him questions, I'd make a fool out of him. And not because I would be mean or uncharitable, but his logic is so ridiculous. Holy smoke. Like, dude, think past your own forehead here.
Well, no, Jeremiah O'Leary is the guy who basically was a plant for the FBI.
Absolutely.
So he followed the HSCA all the way through. He was actually one of the only broadcasters that was brought into almost every single one of those little sidebars that they have.
Yep, you're right.
He's a very loyal figure to the FBI. So I think a lot of his stuff was just going to kind of agree with the official government narrative, but obviously he was kind of balanced as a reporter and still kind of going, well, you could have this. Like, he brought up interesting points about what Weck showed with the bullets being shot into cotton wadding and things of that sort, but then eventually said Weck seemed to have lost his cool throughout this thing and then became incoherent. And it's like, well, that's not what happened at all, and we have the clips for it. Actually, this is probably a good example of what happens. This here, Bugliosi, this is during the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. I had to clip this because it was kind of
1986.
important. But everyone just listen to what exactly is said.
Right.
1974 article, 1974 article for Forensic Science, page 128. Did you say this? So far as the available medical evidence shows, all shots were fired from the rear. No support can be found for theories which postulate gunmen to the front or right front of the presidential car. Did you write those words, doctor?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Available medical evidence.
All
That's
right.
the phrase,
Let's
Mr.
go on to other
Bugliosi.
questions.
Available medical evidence.
He'll have some opportunity on redirect. Just answer my questions.
You know, I think he is, and I don't think he's being fair with this witness, Your Honor.
He's not.
Somehow, when he gives an answer that he doesn't like, then he admonishes the witness and scolds him. And I think a witness ought to be able to answer without being scolded by
Objections
Mr.
overruled.
Bugliosi.
I think Dr. Weck's handling himself all right.
I think he's doing all right, too.
Again, no available medical evidence. That word available, the missing evidence that we don't have, that's fragments, that's other things. That's very important to keep in mind. So when Boden's saying, I'm looking at the autopsy and what we can see from the Zapruder film, that's the available stuff. Where's the stuff that we should have that we don't, that's either been sealed away or it comes out 20 years after the fact?
The clip you showed of Boden and was pre-acoustics, because Boden testified in September of 78. Acoustics didn't come out until later on. And then Weck here, this is in 86, but what Bugliosi is referencing is something that Weck said in 74. Well, Weck's right. The available evidence. Well, that's 4 years before the acoustics evidence came out. Changes everything. And so when Bugliosi does that, he's purposely not being fair, and he has to know it.
This is what Michael Boden said about the throat wound being an exit.
The clothing, the tie and the collar, the tears or rips in them were caused, in fact, by the bullet exiting, or were these, like the other, the jacket and so forth, possibly cut away or ripped away by the surgeons operating in Dallas? Do you have any information which could specifically?
That's a good question.
At that point, the shirt was not cut at that point, as far as we can tell. The perforation itself, although it could look like a cut wound, a cut to the casual observer, is typical of the slit-like irregularity. It's irregular, it's not sharp, of an exit perforation. When a bullet goes in, it'll destroy some of the tissue, some of the clothing on entrance, and get generally a roundish type hole where the edges can't be approximated because there's a little bit of fabric missing. On an exit perforation, as of this nature, not only is there a jagged slit-like, but not sharp perforation in the fabric, but it is also, there's no loss of clothing fabric, so the edges are well approximated. It is right overlying the perforation that the doctors saw at Parkland Hospital. And I think there's no other hole in the fabric, and I think it's a reasonable conclusion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that that slit-like hole in the shirt and the nick in the tie was caused by whatever came out of the neck, and not by a knife, with no accounting for what happened.
So that agrees with your point.
Right, yeah.
And then this is David Lifton commenting on that.
On Friday night, the FBI reported that based on Dr. Hume's examination, he said the bullet did not transit. It's very reasonable to assume that he wrote an earlier draft which reflected what the FBI got from him on Friday
So
night.
the bullet did not transit.
The bullet
Which
that entered
bullet?
the back, the bullet that entered the back, the non-fatal bullet did not transit.
Meaning
did not exit
did not exit through his
because
throat.
they thought that night that that was a tracheotomy. It's possible that the earlier draft says that. This is speculation. They should be asking the question under oath.
Whereas in fact, the single bullet theory claims that the bullet did transit. Not only did it transit, but it left President Kennedy's throat and then injured Governor Connolly.
Yeah, and there's one other matter I'd like to bring up, if I may. Dr. Hume said that he did not know, and it's the general position here, that it was not known that night that this was a bullet wound, that they thought it was a tracheotomy incision. But another Navy admiral, Dr. George Berkeley, was in Dallas. He was in the motorcade. He went to Parkland Hospital. Certainly he knew that...
Did he accompany the body back to
absolutely,
the Naval Hospital?
And he was one of the highest ranking officers.
So your question is why he didn't tell
absolutely
Dr. Humes about the...
I have two questions. Why didn't he tell Dr. Humes that's a bullet wound? Don't be confused because of the tracheotomy incision. And secondly, why isn't this committee asking this kind of question?
Interesting.
Yeah, why didn't the committee ask those questions?
Yeah.
I don't honestly. I think that a lot of people, like, again, you look at the hearings that we just had. A lot of people were kind of just there. I mean, I thought reasonable questions were asked on a lot of things. I think a lot of the stuff, the medical, the scientific, acoustic stuff, goes over people's heads. So again, I don't expect any of the members of the HSCA that didn't have any experience in that to be able to ask those questions. Again, Robert Edgar was the only one that was really asking questions about the guns. Floyd 15 asked a couple. But mostly it just comes down to what people can see and what's common sense type logic. You know, how can one bullet transition through two people and make all those different types of wounds come out perfectly pristine? These are something everyone raised as a question. But again, the HSCA, I commend them for the work that they did do on it now that I look back at it. And I think a lot of things were asked that I probably wouldn't have even thought to have asked. So
I agree.
Again, it's kind of learning through it all. This was H.B. McLean, who was the person that was blamed for the motorcycle. Saying that it was his microphone that was stuck in the on position.
Testimony offered by acoustical experts led the committee to conclude that President Kennedy was probably the victim of a conspiracy to assassinate him. That conclusion was based largely on an analysis of a tape recording, which committee investigators said was made when a radio microphone on a police motorcycle was stuck, transmitting the sounds of the assassination scene to police headquarters. The committee investigator said the microphone was on Dallas Patrolman H.B. McLean's motorcycle. Officer McLean said after hearing the tape, the transmission could not have come from his radio or from any radio near the president's limousine.
Then it's definitely not mine. According to this tape, it was not my motorcycle. It's a radio transmitter that was stuck.
What does Officer McLean think about the committee's investigation?
It looked like he's trying to pull the wool over my eyes.
McLean said he has not talked with anyone from the committee since hearing the tape, and no one from the committee has commented since the patrolman reached his conclusion.
I love at the ending where it sounds like the dude's stuttering. It's because it's an AI voice that I had to put on top of someone's real voice so it doesn't get copyright infringement.
Yeah.
And it was like,
That's true.
I wanted to play two more clips and then we can get back to the kind of discussion. This was Floyd 15 talking to Michael Bodden, and this was about, or not Michael Bodden, Vincent Gwynn about the neutron activation tests.
That the Warren Commission had the FBI perform neutron activation analysis in 1964?
Yes.
How did you find this out?
Well, it was rather interesting because both Dr. John Nichols and I felt that activation analysis of the bullet lead specimens in the President Kennedy case should be done. And he in particular was trying to persuade J. Edgar Hoover first and later Clarence Kelly that these things should be done. Made no progress. And then quite accidentally in the archives it turned up a letter from J. Edgar Hoover to J. Lee Rankin in July of '64 stating that indeed the FBI had made activation analysis measurements on these samples, which was totally unknown to us. So therefore, after that, we requested the results because this little letter didn't give any numerical results. It just said they'd been done and the results were generally inconclusive.
Those the results were inconclusive, and that means that why would they submit it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So again, that's why it was, and also, like I said, that was the first time the FBI had ever used that type of science before. J. Edgar Hoover didn't trust lie detectors; he didn't trust that, so they weren't going to use it as strong evidence. So they really just kind of just act like it didn't happen.
Well, I think what's interesting about the neutron activation analysis is the whole thing is, this notion that the specimens that were used and the batches of bullets that were used, they said, well, CE 399 and And there's a connection between that one and the wrist wound. The fragment from Connolly's wrist wound. They had high concentrations of antimony. And then later on, they say, well, you know, the one that for, I think it was 843 or 840 or 567, that's how they labeled them. They had low concentrations of antimony. Well, that's all fine and good. None of these people were metallurgists, including Gwynn. He taught chemistry at the college level, which I'm sure he knew chemistry really well, but he's not a metallurgist. And when the metallurgists appear on the scene in the early 2000s and they take a look at Gwynn's work, they say it's just absolute nonsense. There was only one lab, and the FBI ran it, that did this kind of analysis. And once the work of Eric Randage and Spiegelman and Grant, all these people come out in the early 2000s, what did the FBI do? They shut down the only lab that did this kind of analysis, because they said, this is just junk science. It doesn't prove anything. And people are going to prison based on no evidence whatsoever. So we're shutting it down. And they've been shut down to this day. They don't even use them anymore, because they realize to say, well, this bullet can be traced to this rifle. Or Randage and Spiegelman, they all prove that no, it can't, because there's such a wide range of different chemical compounds in each bullet. You can't possibly link one to something else. So what that means is, once again, get out the trash bin, and you now can throw neutron activation analysis in the same trash bin as you can, say, in 312 shows Kennedy's head going forward, or the acoustics doesn't really tell you any. It's all just nonsense. This thing is now almost reducible to science in so many areas. And neutron activation analysis, and remember, this was Blakey's linchpin. That was called the linchpin in the case. Blakey had it, was that you hear people say this all the time. Oh, well, that bullet, that fragment can be traced to Oswald's rifle to the exclusion of all others. Well, Randage and all these people proved. And by the way, these people have no interest whatsoever, Robbie, in the Kennedy assassination. They're just good metallurgists. And they just looked at the specimens, they looked at the analysis and said, guess what, gang? Gwynn was totally wrong. This is junk science. The FBI took them seriously, and they closed down the only lab that did this kind of work in the United States. So there is no lab that does this anymore, because it proves absolutely nothing. So once you remove that card out of the deck, Robbie, that changes everything. You no longer can say that fragment is connected to Oswald's rifle or this fragment. You can't do it. Done. And so what we need to be at this point, we just need to be honest and say, okay, there may be other things that you can argue, but you no longer can argue that this bullet can be traced to this rifle. It just does not work.
What would you say when you're looking at, I guess, evidence that we don't have, and things like I brought up about the shots of the acoustic that could have been if they had more time, stuff of that sort? What do you say? Because obviously there's a whole slough of information I just kind of showed here. Conflicting reports, different things from Michael Bodden stating one thing and saying that the whole medical panel agrees with him. Weck's the only dissenter. Yet Weck, I think, has more experience than anyone that was on the medical panel, all of their autopsies combined, I'm pretty sure. So you would go with the more experienced person. He also said the fix was in. If you wanted to maybe talk about that a little bit. Because, again, Blakey gets a lot of crap for, like, the fix is in. But he also pushed to have the acoustics in there. Again, he agreed with the official line. I believe that he was not going to kind of fall from that. But in a sense, he was tried to be honest. But I think in the sense that he was, not to say blind idiot, but he was someone that did not realize that the CIA and FBI were withholding information from him and letting him only see certain documents. Again, look at Burt Griffin's testimony. He's saying, I think the Warren Commission report was a fault on our part, the secondary commission who wrote the report, and said that we weren't etiquette, or we didn't have any proper use of wording to, be able to frame this in the right state of mind. So that's on us. He also said that the Warren Commission sacrificed truth for speed. So again, this is someone that is still a lone nutter today, and was there saying some pretty damning thing against the Warren Commission, because again, a lot of people who were on the Warren Commission didn't really care about what was going on. They were just trying to get through it. Some of the people didn't even want to serve. And again, everyone's separated on the magic bullet theory. But if you ask everyone why they separated on the magic bullet theory, it was because John Connolly convinced them.
Absolutely.
So, was Connolly just kind of a big figure that could easily do that with people, or did everyone have trust in what Connolly stated? So
I think the strength of Connolly's testimony is he was there. He was in the car. He got hit. His perception should have been taken more seriously. he never really wavered at all, Robbie. Before the Warren Commission, HSCA, they're almost verbatim testimony. And he says, look, the bullet that hit Kennedy did not hit me. His wife, Nellie, was looking around, observing as best she could, given the circumstances. She said the bullet that hit Kennedy did not hit John, her husband. And the sad commentary is the Warren Commission or the HSCA did not believe John Connolly's testimony. And I think that's kind of sad. He should have been taken more seriously. For goodness sakes, he was there. He experienced some pretty high level trauma. For goodness sakes.
Not even that, just the people writing to him afterwards saying that he was responsible for the death of Kennedy. I mean, you hear him tear up when he's trying to talk about it.
Exactly. And I think one thing we have to remember is that if my analysis is true, and I say my analysis, not my analysis, I'm piggybacking on people who've done, really all the heavy lifting, and I just come as a Johnny come lately. But the one thing that Keith Fitzgerald figured out back in, probably 20, 25 years ago, he's unfortunately passed away now, but 20, 25 years ago, he noticed that the head wound to Kennedy exponentially gets larger from frame 312 to about 337. And he's already been hit in the head at 312, 313, whatever one you want to say it happened at. So what happened to make that wound so much bigger? And it is noticeably bigger, Robbie. Something happened. Well, now along come the acoustics, and they answer that question, because they say at right around frame 327, which would be 0.7 of a second after the headshot that we see on the film, Kennedy is hit in the head a second time, and that's the bullet that goes through Kennedy's head. The cranial cavity has already erupted at 312, so it can't erupt twice. That's why you don't see a big explosion like you do at 313. That bullet goes through Kennedy's head and is most likely the bullet that strikes John Connolly in his wrist, and then the fragment goes into his thigh. Not the one that went through his chest is most likely not the one that struck the wrist, like you hear all the time. And when you look at the and this is on YouTube, people can go on YouTube and go, type in WEC 2013, Josiah Thompson's talk, and he turns it over to Keith Fitzgerald, and he has all this incredible footage. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was absolutely blown away. So my God, it lines up perfectly with the headshot at Kennedy at 327, goes through Connolly's wrist, the fragment goes to his thigh. It answers a ton of questions. And here's another question that it kind of answers is, why is it that so many people say I only heard at least 3 shots and sometimes 4? And I think one of the reasons is because the shot that hits Kennedy at 313, then 0.7 of a second later, another one hits him at 327. I don't know that the human ear would have been able to decipher, that's 2 shots. It happened that quick. And so if that's the case, and also remember the first shot, and this is interesting, if the HSCA said there's 5 shots because of the acoustics evidence, you can eliminate 2 that you probably would have heard. The first one, I don't think anyone would have probably known what it was. Was it a firecracker? Was it a motorcycle backfiring? And then they hear these 3 shots. They may not have heard the 4th one after that, the 5th one, because it's right on top of the 4th one. 4th and 5th one are 0.7 of a second apart from each other. So if you look at it that way, I can easily see why someone said, I heard 3 shots, because that would have made perfect sense. They weren't there to witness an assassination. They were there just to get a view of President Kennedy, most likely Jackie as well. They're not sitting there with a pad going, okay, that's shot 1. Oh, there's another one, that's shot 2. They're just watching a parade, for God's sakes. So their perceptions aren't going to be even what you and I are after the fact, looking back at the film. And to be fair, the film only shows 3 reactions. It shows Kennedy's reaction, Connolly's reaction, and then Kennedy's headshot. Those are the only 3 we actually see in the film, even though I think there's 2 other ones that probably took place. But they're almost invisible because of what's already happened to Kennedy and Connolly. So I think there's good explanations for all these things. And I think when you look at the acoustics, when you look at neutron activation analysis, when you look at the work of David Wimp, totally destroying the notion that Kennedy went forward at 312 when it's just a swipe in the film, or the work of Keith Fitzgerald, which explains why Kennedy's wound enlarges so much in 0.7 of a second, because he's hit a second time in the head is why. And that's why, I mean, wounds don't grow big on their own in 0.7 of a second. Something has to happen to make it do that. And so when you look at that wound at 312, Robbie, or 313 or 314, then you look at it 335, 337, you go, oh my God, what the heck happened there? Well, he was hit twice in the head. Kennedy was within 0.7 of a second. And I think, again, I think this just comes down to the science of the film, the science of acoustics, all this stuff plays into it. It's easy to get lost in it, though, and that kind of came up earlier when you were and I were talking. It's not easy to explain these things. It's one. I tell my students all the time, it's one thing to prepare the food. It's a whole different ballgame to deliver the food. A lot of people can make the food, but it takes a real skilled person to be able to deliver the food to where people go, "Oh, I understand that. Thank you." This stuff is not easy to explain. I mean, you had Don Thomas on your show at least twice that I know of. It's not easy to explain the acoustics evidence or neutron activation analysis or any of this stuff, but I'm still going to keep trying because I think it's important. And I think it explains things in the case that without which some things just don't seem to make sense at all. And that, I just almost hear people and see people react when I say, yeah, I think the throat wound was an accident wound. The first thing they think of, oh, you believe in the single bullet theory? No, I didn't say that. I just said I think Kennedy was hit in the back and the bullet came out of his throat, went halfway down the city of Dallas. We never saw it again. So, yeah, I don't think that the single bullet theory is true, but I do think that he was shot in the back and the throat, the bullet came out of his throat. I do think that happened. I think it's the most reasonable explanation.
They're also going to say, he also thinks the bullet went halfway across the city of Dallas.
That's exactly right. Okay. I will defend myself and say I was speaking in hyperbole. I was exaggerating to make a point.
I think you make a great point. I do think the acoustics is important, but I also would not use that as my evidence for anything. A lot of people always talk about there's all this evidence about the Kennedy assassination that we have, and I go, there's more evidence of what people keep pointing towards is to the evidence of a cover-up. There's a lot of things that people keep pointing to as that's evidence that he was behind it. That's not that. Everyone is in agreement that they need to make sure that this narrative is out there to stop another thing from happening, like another war or some type of invasion or any type of that type of sentiment that comes out there. But the main thing when you look at it is instead of analyzing motive, we're trying to say, this is who I think is a suspect or this is who I think is suspicious. Just look at what has came out over 60 years that has changed from the official narrative. That alone suggests that there was more things going on than what the Warren Commission included in the first place. And then investigate the actual investigations. Were they investigations? No, they were not. So that's what I try and look at. And I think looking more at the historical record, I always get in trouble for having a different opinion on LBJ than a lot of people do. Again, I think you got to look at it. He's a Texan. His version of being polite is getting a reporter driving in a car with them, giving them a little scare, like the car's brakes don't work, like there's stories of that happening. And then also drinking a beer while he does it because he's on his own personal ranch. And then that's a Washington person or a New York person, maybe a little bit more sensitive, is not used to that type of thing. And they end up writing a story that LBJ is drinking and driving and almost killed us in a car accident because his brakes weren't working on his car. That's how things evolve and twist and change. And this becomes a problem. Again, when you're looking at the Kennedy stuff, you're going to see nothing but hatred towards LBJ. But then you look at the LBJ stuff and you kind of see a more person that doesn't know what's going on, or he doesn't understand that people are not liking his type of vibe.
Yeah.
Again, so I think that's a perspective to add in there. But also if we boil it back down to what the original subject's about, if you look at the acoustics, it's a lot like LBJ in the case. It's big, it's brash, it's there. It's very controversial, and you kind of have to examine that with the case. You can't just toss it out because everyone disagrees on it or everyone has different.
I would say this, Robbie. You mentioned that you probably wouldn't use the acoustics to try to prove it. I will concede this point, even though I'm like you. I think the acoustics is solid scientific evidence, but I can tell when I bring it up, I just look at the people I'm talking to, and there's this glazed look that goes over. And it's like they tune me out so fast, Robbie. It's not even funny. When if I use any technical language at all, I start talking about, automatic gain control. I've lost them because it's so hard to keep people's attention talking about technical stuff. So even though the acoustics may be solid scientific evidence, you're going to lose people before you ever get halfway through the evidence. And that's a problem.
It's just easier. Again, even with the Oswald discussion, the only thing that really should be mentioned about Oswald is that a lot of evidence that was incriminating to Oswald came out after the fact. Again, you can plant stuff on people. You can do a lot of things. So I think the main point, instead of asking why, who, and all this type of stuff, I think you should just look at like what Burke Griffin said, which was just that look at the record of like what we have and then try and sort out what is truth and not and combine it into something. And that is your evidence.
Right. I agree. And maybe at the end of the day, Robbie, it's a false mystery. What's his name? Vincent Salandria said that within a couple of years. He warned us. He said, do not go into the weeds because that's exactly what they want you to do. And the acoustics would be the weeds for sure. He said, look, this is pretty straightforward. We knew day one that there was probably a conspiracy going on in this thing. He said, and we've just taken it and run with it, and only thing we've done is complicate it and bore people into a state of misery, for goodness sake. He may be right. I don't know. It's hard not to, though. Like you say, I've heard you say it. I've heard myself say it. Like, I pick up this document, and then next week, guess what? I picked up 35 more documents. I can't even stop myself. And that's the nature of the case. It gets a hold of you, whether you want it to or not. So,
well, Tim, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show. I'm going to link all your links in the description just so you don't have to rattle them off here at the end unless you want to.
No, that's fine. I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to link them all in the description. People know where to click them. Thank you so much, Tim, again, for giving me the time to have this discussion. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. I'll also link Tim Smith's Dealey Plaza UK video that he was on recently when that comes out. And that'll be in the description below, too. And that might bring you a little bit to why we might have had this discussion here today.
Sure.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again, Tim. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.